Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents Channel. My name is Jesse Durham. I'm very excited for this installment in our interview series where we're going to be having a conversation with a fellow practitioner of the infinite banking concept, someone who's implemented this concept into their own personal life, but furthermore, with a colleague that's a professional in this space. It's interesting to me that this is going to be our first one-on-one conversation instead of being part of a group conversation, but I'm really excited to share it with everybody. So let's welcome Miss Robin Washington to the podcast, to the channel. Miss Robin, we were talking, of course, before I hit record, but how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Life is good. I don't have any complaints.
Yes, ma'am. And you are busy. So let me say right out of the gate, you were telling me something about your day, and we worked on our timing, of course,
Yes.
for this call. But I'm very, very thankful for you to carve out the time to have an interview, to have a discussion with me.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm glad that you were flexible to kind of, adjust your time a little bit. Life happens. And one of the things I have, grandkids that my desire is to be a part of their life. They're little now, and I want to be there at everything that's going on. So when they call, I literally drop everything and go, Grandma's going to be there. so
I love that.
I appreciate your flexibility.
Of course. Well, I can understand because I am a family man as well myself, and I do work, virtually and from home a lot. And that's one of the beauties of having flexibility in our schedule at times, of
Yes.
course. But
Yeah.
again, thank you for being here. We were talking a little bit, and again, like I said at the intro there, this is our first one-on-one conversation. We've had several conversations as being part of a round table, as being part of a group. But we'd also planted the idea a month or two ago, I guess, of having this call because I know that even in those group settings where we've been talking as a group, I've been able to hear some of your background, some
Mhm.
of your experience, and you've been in this way longer than I have. You've been practicing infinite banking longer than I have, even. And of course, that interests me on a personal level, let alone a professional level, right? Where you're
Yeah.
helping clients and prospects that potentially will become clients and that whole process. So, if you would take us back to where we were before we hit record a little bit on who you are, where you're from, anything that you'd like to share personally, and then we'll start in on how you were exposed to infinite banking.
Okay. Well, as you introduced me earlier, I'm Robin Washington, and I say that I'm nothing special from the standpoint that I represent a lot of people, and that you're looking for answers, to your money issues and problems. And for my husband and I, that started back in 2005, 2006. We were young, married couple, and trying to figure out how to make our dollars work. And one of the reasons that I think back, what kind of started our journey was me understanding that we didn't know about money. And I wasn't raised in a household or a family that was, say, business minded or entrepreneurs or anything like that. I didn't go to school for business, though in high school I had one little course of economics, but other than that, I didn't have any money knowledge. And so I remember one day looking at my husband and saying, how do we make decisions on our money when we don't know anything? So that started kind of our educational journey. So my husband and we have two boys. They were little at the time, and we just started to walk together to try to understand, how to get money to work for us and how to work for money. But basically, background wise, I went to school for electronics. That was my background.
Okay.
Went to school for electronics, graduated, and thought that, that was something I wanted to do. Met my husband and thought that, I wanted to be this corporate girl and climb the corporate ladder type of deal. He wanted me to be that stay-at-home mom, and in the beginning I rejected that. But when God grabs a hold of your heart, you begin to see what's really the right path, and I began to realize after our second son, actually, that I wanted to be home. And so at some point in 1988, I quit work to come home to homeschool my children. And we were a single income family. Basically, my husband, we were based in California at the time in the Bay Area, and he was our sole provider. And we basically just trusted God in that process, but we were operating on a single income. And so about 2000, I think 2006 is, kind of when we were faced with kind of making some financial decisions. And that's where I realized, well, how do we make these decisions when we don't really understand money? And so I will say that a friend at the time happened to mention a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that book literally just kind of changed our mindset, or opened up our mindset, I guess you can say.
Sure.
And from there, I've been one that has, literally hungered after, how do you get money to work? How do you get money to work for you instead of you working for money? And just through a series of events, we bumped into IBC, as a game changer in our financial
No doubt. Okay, so
world.
let me ask a couple of questions in this trajectory. Then, number
Mhm.
one, you mentioned earlier that y'all were based in the Bay Area. What did your husband do at the time?
He worked for AT&T, so he was in the management sales area of AT&T.
Okay, so
Yeah.
and I love all this real life insight into you're working through things in your marriage, you're
Mhm.
growing as a family, you're making education choices for
Mhm.
the family. You're living on the other side of the country from where you're living at right now. Okay, so there's
Yes.
there's there's all these different aspects, and then Rich Dad Poor Dad, that's going to be a well-known book to many folks. Again, I
Yes.
know you and I both know that there are still other people out there that this might be the first time that they hear about it,
Mhm.
and hopefully it will propel them to pick up that great book by
Oh,
Robert
yes.
Kiyosaki.
Oh,
It
yes.
was one of the first personal growth and development books that I had read. I also read it before Becoming Your Own Banker by
Mhm.
R.
Mhm.
Nelson Nash.
Mhm. Right.
So if you would then, okay, so how did you get exposed to the book? You said that was a friend that said something about it to you? Work
Yes.
friend?
No, actually, and I might use the friend loosely
That's
because
okay.
we kind of met through a mutual individual. And I can't remember what setting we were in, but she happened to mention to me a book that she had read that was really good in terms of helping her to understand, what money was all about. And for some reason, I remembered the title. That was the interesting thing, because I believe it was probably at least maybe months or a good year before that book came back to my memory. And so she was someone that was kind of that crossed my path. To this day, I really haven't seen or heard from her anymore.
How
But
interesting.
that was a lasting impression that she made, because at the time that my husband and I were kind of at this crossroads of what to do financially, that her words about that book came to my memory. And I remember telling my husband this particular day in this particular conversation, I remember saying, honey, how do we make decisions about our money when we really don't know much? And I remember dropping my kids off at a friend's house, and I dropped them off and I went straight to Barnes and Nobles to look for that book because it stuck in my memory of her saying that it was a good book and it gave her understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so my husband and I, read a couple of chapters, just to see if this was something that, we wanted to kind of read together.
So he
And
got on
it was,
board right away with wanting to read the book as well. Oh,
well, let me
okay.
let me just say that um I'm a reader. My husband
Okay.
is, he's an auditory learner, so we have two different learning styles. And so when I mentioned the, reading a book and hey, we got to educate ourselves, he was kind of resistant at first. But I made a deal with him and I said, okay, honey, do me a favor. I said, let's just read 2 chapters of this book. And if you don't like it after the second chapter, then fine, you put it down or I'll go read it by myself or whatever. But I'm just asking, would you at least give me 2 chapters? And so he did.
Wonderful.
He agreed to it. And we read the 2 chapters together, out loud together. And after the end of the second chapter, I closed the book and I thanked my husband for, holding up his end of reading the book with me. But then his response to me was like, that was interesting. Well, why don't we just read the next chapter? And so I
Awesome.
politely opened the book back up and we started to read the third chapter. And bottom line is we ended up finishing the book, within, I don't know, maybe a week or two. We finished the book together, but it was an eye opener. And from there, though, I actually delved deeper into Robert Kiyosaki and his platform. We had the opportunity. It's interesting how, God lines everything up. But shortly after we finished reading that book, it just so happens I found out that Robert Kiyosaki was going to be in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we actually went to go to one of his, seminars. And what happened there is that Robert Kiyosaki talked about at the time, he was doing like study groups. And, he pitched about his study group that he was going to be having in Arizona. And the cost of that study group was going to be like $3,000. And I'll never forget that time, Jesse, because I wanted so much to go, because right now I'm a sponge and I'm just, absorbing, absorbing, absorbing. And I wanted to go, but it was like, ooh, $3,000. It was kind of hefty, Remember, this was actually around 2000, 2001, right around that time frame when
Right.
this book went
$3,000
down.
20 years ago is even a different story than it is today, for
Exactly.
sure.
And you still remember, I'm a single income family at this point. How do we do this, right? But I talked to my husband and, and of course prayed about it. And I remember just kind of 3 questions just kind of came to my mind is like, hey, if this was free, would I go? And well, sure, I'd go in a heartbeat. If it was a couple of $100, would I go? Yeah, I would go in a heartbeat. Well, then why would I go now? The thing that was holding me back was the $3,000,
Mm-hmm.
and my husband and I, we kind of talked about it and he agreed that, hey, yeah, you go. He would stay with the kids and manage the household. And so I stepped out on faith, didn't necessarily have $3,000 laying around, but I I trusted that it was going to be an investment into, the direction that we were going to learn about how money works and how to get money to work for us. And so I went to Robert Kiyosaki, and he only had, I think it was maybe 150 people
Mm-hmm.
there. And it was 3 days. It was intense. If you can imagine, it was like from 8 in the morning till 11 at night. And it was bam, 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 bam. But I walked away that after that weekend, my mind was completely blown up wide open. And I began to realize that a lot of us don't understand our money. We don't understand how money works. And we're kind of doing things with the lack of knowledge with our money in hopes to try to get more money, but consequently we just keep sliding backwards and back, further and further back.
Right.
So I realize when I tell people now, it might sound like a stretch, but that's what faith is about, is stretching yourself. And it might sound like a stretch, but if you invest in yourself, then the $3,000 I invested back then, I have well gotten that money back and then some, so to speak, because of the knowledge. That's what I talk so much about. Without knowledge, you can't accomplish anything. There's nothing different between, what I would recognize is there's nothing different between me and the person who's a millionaire or a billionaire. We both were born into the world in the same fashion. We are both going to leave in the same fashion. It's just, what are we going to do in between, the time that we're born and the time that we leave? And what I realize is what that started to do, just kind of spending those 3 days of in-depth, and I did it a couple of times with Robert Kiyosaki's study groups, so having that in-depth, sitting under him and just, absorbing the understanding about money and how the financial world works, it has helped me to realize that there's nothing different between me and the next millionaire. The only difference is the knowledge, and with knowledge, then we can begin to accomplish, get our money to do what money is supposed to do, but because we don't have the knowledge and we don't understand money principles, there are principles or laws around money that a lot of us, we don't understand, because for most of us, like me, I tell people I didn't grow up with money. I didn't grow up in a entrepreneurial, quote unquote, family. I didn't grow up stepping into my daddy's business or something like that. I started from literally ground zero, opening up a book and begin to educate myself. And that's what makes the difference between those who have money and those who don't.
So interesting. So I can put myself in your shoes and relive my own experience. It's very similar, or at least I can see where certain points along our trajectories make me reflect, right? So this description I'm thinking of would not surprise you. It's from scripture where seed is being cast, right? And some
Yep,
lands on the rocks. Yeah, I know you're
exactly.
familiar. Some lands on the rocks, some is eaten by the birds, etc. But some of it lands on the good ground, and that just seems to describe that particular point in your life, that crossroads, if I
Yeah.
used your words,
Mhm.
to where the right person said the right thing. You had this moment of inspiration, and here's the other thing: is I'm a big believer that when something comes across my mind, that at least I need to write it down right away, or I
Mhm.
need to buy the thing, or I need to, you know, um, take some first step of action to move me in that direction so that I will keep going. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, you dropped the kids off and you went and you got that book and you
Mhm.
read that book and that led you to seminars and things like that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then not only that, but you put some money behind it. You know, you made some sacrifices, and that makes me think. I mean, I know Jim Rohn's talked about it, Zig Ziglar's talked about it. Making investments in yourself is never a waste. We could put any pick the number, right? But we could put money in stocks or in real estate or in something, right? And a lot of folks are just trying to throw spaghetti at a wall. Maybe
Yep,
it'll stick, maybe it won't.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
But even if you'd have gone to that seminar and you'd have said, well, no, this particular thing, this particular subject, it's not for me, but you would have learned that. You
Exactly.
still wouldn't have walked away empty. So, okay, that's really neat for me. So let me ask this question, Miss Robin. When you had read the book, and I suppose this would have been before you'd gone to the seminars,
Hmm.
but can you reflect on that particular book and point out a big takeaway or a big particular
Oh, yeah.
aha moment?
Yes. Like I said, for me, that book was a pivotal turn. Um, in the book, Robert Kiyosaki talks about two dads. He grew up under two dads. Loved going to the seminar because we got a little deeper background on these two dads.
Sure.
So he talks about growing up under, his biological dad, who was the superintendent of Hawaii. And so he made good money. So, financially, his dad was, I guess you could say, successful by,
Mm-hmm.
what most people's standards are.
Mm-hmm.
But he also was raised up with his best friend's dad, which he called his rich dad. So he called his biological dad his poor dad. His rich dad was his best friend's dad, but his rich dad was one who never went past, I think he said, the sixth grade or something. He didn't go very far,
Right.
but he became one of the richest men in Hawaii. And so Robert Kiyosaki talks about how he was at a crossroads where he needed to choose, financially, which dad was he going to align with.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up, aligning with the principles of his rich dad. And the thing that I really love about his book is actually the subtitle of his book, because he talks about, what the rich teach their kids that the poor and middle class don't. And they don't because they don't know it to pass it on. That's
Yes.
really the bottom line of it. And so for me, again, it just reiterated that you can't do better if you don't have the knowledge to do better in anything. It's not just money, it's just in any area. And so I realized, with Robert Kiyosaki and that book, just understanding the two mindsets. There's the what he called his poor dad, who was successful. He had a good job. He had your traditional, 401k or pension or whatever. And then you had the mindset of the rich dad, and that, he didn't necessarily have the educational position, but he had financial understanding,
That's right.
and how to operate the dollar, and ultimately became, the richest man in Hawaii. So again, it just kind of reiterated for me the importance of knowledge. And even the Bible says, if I'm a Bible girl, I tell people all day long that I am one that believes in the Word of God. And one of the things that the Word of God says is, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So I see that as a principle. If you don't gain the knowledge, then you can't operate to the full potential that we were designed to operate. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that I think for me in that book, that was one of the things that was kind of the biggest takeaway, is understanding there's two mindsets of operation when it comes to the dollar. You can operate with the poor dad's type of mentality, basically, save and, don't spend and, put your money in things that aren't going to really work for you. Or you can take that dollar and sow it into seeds to produce other dollars, to produce more dollars. And so overall, it's one that I always recommend people, their first step, get the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, because you need to understand the two different mindsets. And what I realized is how we were operating, just my husband and I, was similar to the poor dad's mindset. Hey, let's just work until 30 years until we retire or whatever, and hope that our pensions are pretty much gone by the wayside, but the 401k, is going to be everything that we hoped it to be, so that we can live this lifestyle that we have been painted a picture of living. And, we were down that road. But I'm thankful that, God began to show us wisdom in the rich dad's mindset.
That's right. That's right. And I love that scripture reference that you gave. And wisdom is surely out there.
Mm-hmm.
And you combine that with whether the soil is fertile, whether the individual is ready to participate in gaining knowledge and wisdom and vision for themselves or not. And then you can move forward. Okay. So if we did pick back up with your timeline, then you've read Rich Dad Poor Dad, you've gone to seminars at this point. I think you're somewhere around 2006. How was it then? When did it happen? How did it happen that you were exposed to becoming your own banker and the infinite banking concept?
So from, going to Robert Kiyosaki study groups, and I went to a couple of times. So the price tag didn't scare me. The price tag didn't scare me anymore. But what happened now is I began to be in a position where I was open. There was a real estate seminar. If there were anything free, I always say, I'll go to the free things. And if I can walk away with one nugget, then it was worth it to me. So from there, we started becoming, or maybe me, and more so became a financial junkie, where I just started.
Well, I'll say this about your husband before you move on about you taking the deep dive, because I can understand that. That's me in our household too, right? Lauren's listened to some things. She's read some things. We've talked through plenty of things. We've done things together, but I'm more in the books. I'm more listening to the podcast and things like that. But I'll say this about your husband. I really appreciated, and this is like marriage insight, quality marriage insight for me to hear you describe how you went about, politely and just you're giving me this virtuous woman vibe, this Proverbs 31 woman vibe.
That's
of, how you were with your husband, but how you were successful in that venture. And, of course, with Robert Kiyosaki, he said before in different interviews, he says, I'm not the best writer, but what's said about my books is they're best sellers. So with a title like Rich Dad Poor Dad, I think you had a good chance, even with your husband, who's maybe not so much of a reader, but to his commendation, he went through those first two chapters with you and then kept going. So that's great. I love that.
Yeah. So we kind of started, I became that, if you will, the financial junkie, meaning that, you always got mailers in, hey, there's a real estate seminar, there's a stock seminar, there's, this seminar. And if it was free, it worked in my timetable, I would go, and I would listen. I even got to the point where, my husband, he's been in the stock market. That's his passion.
Okay.
And so he's one that likes to watch the different financial channels like CNBC, stuff like that. I didn't understand anything, So one day, again, because of the understanding, hey, Robin, you just got to learn, And one of the things that I did is I started making myself sit down and listen to the channel like CNBC, just to start hearing. Didn't understand a thing. Everything's going over my head, but I would listen, and little by little, over time, something started to make sense, or I could, I would pick it up. And what I began to realize is that money has a language just like any other language out here. I don't speak Spanish, or I speak very, very little Spanish, but I know that if I were to be dropped off in, Mexico or Spain or somewhere where they just primarily speak Spanish, the first day I'm there, I'm not going to understand anything that anybody's saying. But over time, as I
That's
keep
right.
listening, my ear will become tuned to, the language. And so that's what I begin to understand about money language, the financial language. It's a language, it's just like anything else. But if you will give yourself the opportunity to kind of just listen and get your ear trained to that language, then things will start to make sense. Now I know some things about the stock market. I am not the stock market, person. That's his lane, it's not mine, but he can sit down and he can talk to me about certain things, and I can I grasp it, so, but it's just because I forced myself to sit down and attempt to listen and try to understand. Well, I would go to these different financial seminars. I remember going to my first real estate seminar. I didn't have a clue, what they were talking about, other than, by this point in our lives, we had purchased our own house, but I didn't know all the ins and outs of what you can do with real estate. And the more I started going to these different, seminars or workshops, I began to realize that, wow, there's many different paths to accomplishing real estate, whereas I only knew one at the time, it's like, okay, go down to the bank and fill out a loan application and hope you qualify, but there's many ways, to get real estate. Stocks the same way, so we would go to these different financial seminars, and I'd pick up one or two things, tuck it into my little, if you will, my little knowledge financial notebook. And then as opportunities begin to present themselves, well, I felt better confident in, making decisions. Didn't always know if I was doing exactly the right thing, but I felt more confident in making that decision than before, when I didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it was at one of these financial seminars that I went to, and I remember it was a seminar that had multiple speakers, and they were speaking on all the different topics. It was a real estate speaker there, it was a stock investing speaker there, it was a gold and silver person, so it was just different people that were there. I remember, listening to the various speakers. And then at the end, I remember filling out some form that they had, the people in the audience filled out. Well, somehow that form of whatever I filled out got to, our mentor that became our IBC mentor out in Kansas City. I still to this day do not know how, because they weren't speakers at this event. So I still don't know how they actually got our information. But a phone call came, our phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and this beautiful lady on the other end started, talking about, had I heard of infinite banking before, and I hadn't. At that moment, when she did call, my husband happened to come home from work. So I always talk about divine connections, God lines things up. And my husband happened to come home from work on this particular time. And so I put it on speakerphone, because she told me that she had gotten my information from this seminar workshop thing that I went to. And so I didn't know what she was talking about, had never heard of infinite banking, and really didn't grasp what she was, trying to deliver to me. But my husband picked up on something. And the thing that he picked up on was the fact that, you can pay yourself back. And what connected for him was prior to all of this happening, my husband had came into the knowledge that you can borrow from your 401k, and we needed to buy a truck. And so a friend of his at his job talked to him about, hey, did you know you can borrow from your 401k and you can buy, your truck? And so my husband started to research, talk to his, company, rep, HR rep, administrator rep. And they begin to explain, oh yeah, you can do that. And then when you pay yourself back, that interest that you're paying yourself back goes back to you. So we had purchased our truck in that process. So when this, beautiful lady called us and, talked to us about infinite banking, my husband was able to make that there was a similar connection, a process, that was similar to what we had already done. And so we were open to learning more. That's the other thing that I do talk about, is that you have to be open. You can't position yourself as everything, and it's that can't happen, that's not real, that's not possible, because you don't know what you don't know. But if you're open, you might be surprised that the information you'll be able, that you can receive. And that's
Sure.
one of the things, is that my husband said, yeah, let's make another appointment, I want to know more. So that's what kind of connected us to infinite banking, and how we started to get, how we got exposed to it. It wasn't something that I sought out. I didn't even know it existed, but just through, I'm going to say, divine connection, we connected, to eventually they became our mentors in the infinite banking space.
Okay, so did I hear you correctly then that you at the seminar, at the workshop, there was no one actually speaking on the subject of infinite banking, but obviously there was some kind of, okay, contact information
Right.
shared between individuals. Okay,
Exactly.
so because you're
Exactly.
proactively pursuing your own financial education and
Mhm.
you're active in garnering more wisdom for yourself, more knowledge, someone gets your contact info, they call you, you're open. Again, I agree, that's a big thing, of course. Otherwise, you could say, again, if we put a scripture reference to it, who knows how many times pearls have maybe been cast before
Exactly.
us, and if we weren't open, if we weren't paying attention, like you were saying, we might have just trampled right over a pearl.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So either way, you get this phone call, and your husband actually notices that, and I'm gonna phrase it differently now than
Right.
perhaps even where mine and your mentality were in
Mhm.
your story. Y'all were banking the conventional way, meaning that
Mhm.
y'all had been building up capital, but it was in the 401ks. It was in the
Exactly.
conventional tools that
Exactly.
we're told to use. Okay. So it's possible. It's not nearly as favorable as what you're getting ready to learn more about, of course, but you're realizing that, okay, yeah, we do want to get a truck. Trucks are financed one way or another.
Mhm.
And yet we've been told to put capital over here in things like 401ks. And we do have to borrow, and there are terms and there are conditions and there are all these other things. But okay, so you're exposed in this way. You have a second phone call, I guess, and then you
Yes.
meet some mentors and they're coaching you and they're teaching you. So walk us through.
Okay.
You're learning about this thing to getting
Right.
started.
So we had another phone call, and where, she was kind of explaining a little more about the infinite banking process. But at the end of that phone call, the next step, if we wanted to go any further, was we had to read the book,
Mm-hmm.
Becoming Your Own Banker by Nelson Nash. And so she asked us, would we be open to, reading the book? And I remember my husband saying, well, does it come in CD? Because remember, he's the
That's right.
auditory learner. I'm the one that I'm a visual learner. So I love books.
That
And so
means you might have to read it out loud again.
right, exactly. And I did read some parts out loud to him, but yes, she asked us, because we couldn't go any further unless we read the book, Becoming Your Own Banker. So we agreed, and she mailed us out the book. I don't know, we got it maybe about a week later. And then, we kind of set the timetable for us to come back
Sure.
after we read the book. So that was I guess you could say, the next move up for us in terms of, this infinite banking journey, is that the next step was that we read the book. And that book was, again, I remember reading through it, and I didn't, grasp it as because I tell people, it's out of the box thinking, meaning that we're not used to thinking along this line. We're used to all the traditional stuff that we've been told, this is the way you operate with your money. So it took me a minute, and I remember her saying, she said, read it through the first time without stopping, meaning, don't try to highlight it, don't try to figure it out, don't just read it through. And then she said, now read it a second time, but this time, if you want to highlight and underline different things in it, then do it the second time around. So I'm a student, I will do whatever you tell me to do. So that's how we did it. We read it through the first time, then we came back, and then, and when I read it through the second time, then, a little bit more, kind of made sense. And then after that, we got back together, and we were able to, kind of ask different questions or whatever. And then she began to say, like, what are your goals? What is it that you want to accomplish financially? And so they started to work with us for our first policies, to kind of lay out a plan for our first policies. And so I got a policy on me. Well, we did the application, I remember doing that over the phone. And then, she mailed the application for us to sign or whatever. And then, they started the process. And I will tell people again, even that policy was a stretch for us. It's like you understand there's something good there, but you don't quite understand it,
Sure. Sure.
it's like, okay, I know this is good, but I don't know why, or how it all works, but we trust it. What, by this time we had kind of built up a relationship with the mentors in Kansas, so we trusted them, loved their spirit, and so we started a policy on me and a policy on my husband. And our first policies were $20,000 each. Okay, that was our premium.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget the day that we got approved for our policies. They flew out to the Bay Area to meet with us, and we met in Oakland at a hotel, and they had our policies for us to sign. And I'll never forget, it was a private meeting between them and us, and they were kind of going again, reiterating the whole infinite banking, strategy and everything. And I don't know, we spent maybe a couple of hours with them that day, and then I handed them a check for 40,000, 20,000 each, right? And I remember my husband and I walking out. We had the policies in our hands, and we're walking out of that hotel, and we both looked at each other like, okay, what did we just do? Did we really understand what we just did? We just handed over $40,000, but not completely understanding exactly what this is all about, but just had peace in our heart that it was this was a good thing. And that, again, I talk about faith, because faith stretches you to trust, And
Mm-hmm.
so we had these policies in our hand. And then from there, they were teaching us, left and right, we had so many calls and Zoom calls and we've gone to their seminars and different things like that. So we're constantly educating us. But I tell people to this day, it probably took me at least about 2 years to really fully comprehend or understand what it is that I'm doing, how are we working these policies? It was good because it was an insurance policy. So I didn't have any problems with that. Insurance, we all know what insurance policies are. So that wasn't an issue. It's like, how does this banking stuff, really work?
Mm-hmm.
But again, I kept studying, kept learning, and kept educating myself. And the more you do, the more you become comfortable at the decisions that you make, and that, hey, this is awesome. And from there, we have, those policies have grown. So now we have multiple policies, just my husband and I, as well as my entire family. So it has literally changed my entire family's life, being able to get back in control of our dollars. And so that's kind of the journey that, how we actually went from not knowing nothing about infinite banking to now, being an infinite banking advocate. And I'll go one step further. Once I learned, after I read Nelson's book, I'm one that actually got angry. And I got angry, Jesse, because I didn't understand, why was this not taught to us? Why is it, and I call us mainstream Americas, hardworking Joe the plumber that's getting up
Sure.
every day and working just and to provide for his family. And yet this simple tool that literally can make a difference generationally, I was angry as to, how come this is simple? Why wasn't this taught to, I call mainstream America? Why are we being sold, basically, if you will, buy term and invest the difference? Or, buy term for $2.50 and you'll be happy. So I became angry at, why wasn't this taught? Why are simple principles being kept away from mainstream America? And that is what kind of drove me into becoming an agent. I tell people all the time, if you'd asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up, I would have never, ever, ever in my life said an insurance agent, But because of the infinite banking concept, because it's a simple tool that literally can provide generationally, I wanted to not only be able to tell people, hey guys, you need to look at this tool, the infinite banking process. Um, I not only wanted to tell people about it, but I also wanted to help those who wanted to put this tool in place. And so that's how I even became an insurance agent, So let's see, I would say our first policies were around 2006. And shortly after, I think about 2007, I went and my husband and we went together, and, took an insurance agent class that they held in the Bay Area. I studied like nobody's business to pass the exam, and we did. And that's how I stepped into the world of being a life insurance agent. And my specialty, I can do, a couple of different, areas. I could do annuities, I could do long-term care. I believe in those products as well. But my specialty is infinite banking. I really really, really, really work to really educate people about this simple tool.
Awesome. And I'd like to dig in more there. We will continue the rest of this conversation in our next episode. For now, if you would like more information on what it could look like for you to implement the infinite banking concept into your household or your business or your investing, then check out our free presentation on our website. Also, there's my calendar link where we can have a free consultation call. It's at durhamtalents.com. I do look forward to the conclusion of this conversation with Miss Robin and sharing that with you. But for now, I hope you have a great day. Take care.